Okay, the kids are going to show you some of the songs that they learned this week. The first song you guys all know, because it's our theme song. Oh, yeah. Okay, so go ahead. Okay. You're doing fine.
Through every storm of life, I know you're by my side, so I am holding on to your promises. You are the God who holds my future, all my dreams, so I am holding on. You'll never let go of me. You gave me hope when hope was all but gone. A second chance to sing a brand new song. You opened up my eyes to see. You rescued me, rescued me. You showed the way when there was no way out. Cleared up my mind when you erased all doubt. You made me strong when I was weak. You rescued me, rescued me. Through every storm of life, I know you're by my side, so I am holding on to your promises. You are the God who holds my future, all my dreams, so I am holding on. You'll never let go of me. I'm holding on to you. You are my God, I know you'll see me through. Hey! You are my God, I'm holding on to you. You are my God, I know you'll see me through. Hey! You are my God, I'm holding on to you. You are my God, I know you'll see me through. You are my God, I'm holding on to you. You are my God, I know you'll see me through. Hey! Through every storm of life, I know you're by my side, so I am holding on to your promises. You are the God who holds my future, all my dreams, so I am holding on. You'll never let go of me. I know you're by my side, so I am holding on to your promises. You are the God who holds my future, all my dreams, so I am holding on. You'll never let go of me. I'm holding on to you. You are my God, I know you'll see me through.
Hey!
You are my God, I'm holding on to you. You are my God, I know you'll see me through. Hey!
Very good. Okay, we got one more song to do, guys. We're going to do the song called Millions. Okay? So.
Thank you, God, for saving me. Thank you, God, for saving me. Rescue from the middle of the ocean deep. Rescue from the middle of the ocean deep. You set my feet on solid ground. You set my feet on solid ground. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Everything I have, I owe it all to you. For everything you are and all you do, Lord, I could write a book, fill every single page with a million reasons to thank you, Lord.
Okay, kids, just as a reminder, we're not going downstairs today. Pastor has a story he would like to tell you.
And if we're keeping the kids up here, you know what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to keep it short. My dad taught me one thing about preaching. He always said, be good or be short. I try to. I don't know, though. I made this joke the other day that sometimes, because I talk a lot, right, I'll be in a conversation and I've said something really socially awkward, but I'm not completely aware of it, and then I become aware of it and I realize that the whole conversation is this flaming wreckage coming out of the sky, and in the middle of that, my wife will kick me and be like, what are you doing? And I'll be like, wait, I already know I already know I'm messing up, right? Today, I noticed this, that when we did our story this week, when we did all the stories in the Bible lessons and whatnot in VBS, that our theme was shipwrecked and rescued by Jesus, and they had one story that they didn't tell, and I couldn't believe it because it's the shipwreck that happens in the Bible to a guy named Paul. I hear you, buddy. And by the way, don't worry if your kids are fussing or crying. We've all had kids or been around them. Nobody's like, oh my gosh, kids fussing and crying. I can't believe it, right? I just say they're praising me along. I got you, bro. So listen, I know it's a fine line between a long sermon and a hostage situation. Did you know that? It's a very fine line, so we're going to get to it. Acts 28:3 says this, as Paul gathered a bundle of brushwood and put it on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened itself to his hand. That's an inspirational Bible verse. If you ever do that thing where you randomly go to a place in the Bible and just read something, that's the one you want to point to. So Paul was making a fire, and all of a sudden a snake comes out and bites his hand. And I think at this point in the story, there's a record scratch, and Paul looks at the camera and says, I bet you wonder how I got here on this island with a snake attached to my hand. Right? So here's the thing about Paul. Paul was a very smart guy, but he never knew when to stop talking. I relate to that, right? He was the kind of guy that when he had a point to make, he would make it. Some of my fellow internet warriors occasionally, I have gotten better at it. If somebody posts something you disagree with, you know what you should do, right? Scroll, right? Just keep scrolling. Don't worry about it. Don't push the keys. Just keep scrolling, right? Every now and then, though, I'm like, wait, that person is wrong, and they need me to fix them, right? And I want to type things. Well, Paul was probably one of those guys. If Paul was alive today, there would probably be pages and pages of him explaining to people rightly what God has said. The problem is in our modern society, a lot of times, we're actually disconnected to the people we're talking to, and we say things that we wouldn't actually say to them if they were here. Now, here's the thing about Paul. Paul was a guy that had no chill, as the kids say, right? No chill means this. He didn't know how to small talk. You know how you come up, how's the weather, how are the Bears, how are the Packers, right, all that? Paul goes right into the deep stuff. How about the glories of God and the richness of His mercy and all the mysteries of the kingdom? That's great, right? I mean, he was that guy you couldn't just have a casual conversation with. He wanted to get really deep into everything right away, and that made a lot of people mad, especially people that disagreed with him. Paul was in the habit of getting run out of some pretty nice towns. He got thrown out of all the best places. In fact, I love this verse. Let's go to 2 Corinthians 11, because we're going to talk about his shipwreck here in a second. The thing about it was, before he ever gets to this shipwreck, he goes through a couple of other things first, including a couple of other shipwrecks. See if you get there before I do, or they just put it up on the screen and I read it. We'll see. 2 Corinthians, I'm talking fast. I know. We got kids. 2 Corinthians 11. 2 Corinthians 11, and we're going to go down to verse 23. I understand this. Keep in mind, my parents took in 6 foster kids after they'd raised all of us. And there's a specific point in raising foster kids where you can go to a restaurant with them. And if you've never had to raise kids who've come out of a troubled past, you don't understand what I'm saying there. But there are literally times where you can't take them anywhere to eat. You have to eat at home until they get to that point. And I was there the first time we hit the restaurants together. I was there at a Cracker Barrel, and I left everything I had as a tip because that lady had to clean up some stuff, right? And I felt terrible, right? So listen, in 2 Corinthians 11, verse 23, Paul says, go back to 21. But in whatever anyone dares boast, I am talking foolishly, I also dare. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? He's defending himself here. Are they servants of Christ? I'm talking like a madman. I'm a better one with far more labors and far more imprisonments and far worse beatings and many times near death. 5 times I received the 40 lashes minus 1 from the Jews. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I received a stoning. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I have been a night and a day in the open seas. On frequent journeys I faced dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my own people, dangers from Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers in the sea, and dangers among false brothers, toil and hardship, many sleepless nights, hungers and thirst, often without food, cold and without clothing, not to mention other things. There is a daily pressure on me, concern for all the churches. Paul had been through some stuff. Listen, when was the last time you made an errant comment on the internet and someone walked over to your house and beat you with a rod? How many of you would like the ability to go over to someone's house and beat them with a... Don't raise your hands, it's church. How many of you said some things that somebody could come over to your house and beat you with a rod for it, right? Yeah. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for your honesty back there. Let me tell you something about what Paul's going through right there. The beatings, the imprisonment, the shipwrecks, the being out at sea. He's telling the Corinthians, listen, I have suffered for the gospel. Here's the thing about it that I don't think we get sometimes. That all of those things he went through were part of God's plan. Do you know God isn't super concerned about your comfort level? I know there are some preachers out there and there's some people out there that are all about God wants you to have this, that. And I don't think God is, I'm careful there because I don't think God wants you to be poor and miserable and look like you're sucking on lemons all the time. Amen? I don't believe that's His will for your life. But I do believe that if there is a greater good to be worked, He will occasionally let us go through some things that are at the time very unpleasant, even hard, even sometimes they feel like they're going to break you, and He'll let you go through that to work a greater good, not only in you, but in the people that you are meant to reach. Did you know that? Paul went through all of these things, and it was part of God's plan for him. That's kind of not the plan I want for my life, right? If God said, hey, I want you to go to Northern Illinois and I want you to pastor a church there, I'm like, yay! And He's like, and they're going to beat you with rods. Yay! And they're going to throw you in jail. Yay! And, right? And all these, every time somebody's mean to me, I'm like, I'm not called to preach it. I'm just going to quit. They were mean to me today, right? Imagine that, right? Where you're faced with that kind of persecution, and yet it was so important to him to get the mission done that he did it. And here's how he ends up in a shipwreck. See, there's this other thing that he did. So, I don't know if you know your geography. Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, right? Syria, Palestine. All over that area, he went and preached everywhere. Everywhere he went, he preached and he started churches and he planted churches. But what he knew is at the end of this journey, he was going to go back to Jerusalem to present this to the church in Jerusalem. That was in his head. God said, you need to go back there and give this to him. He was determined to do that. But here's the thing, is that everybody stops him along the way and says, don't go to Jerusalem. If you go to Jerusalem, they're going to hurt you. They're going to wound you. They're going to kill you, which is what they wanted to do. And yet, and here's the thing, you ready for this? Godly people gave him good advice and said, stay away from Jerusalem. But his mission was to go, and so he wouldn't be deterred. So, he gets to Jerusalem, and everybody's like, by the way, they're trying to kill you, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to surround you with some other guys. You're all going to shave your heads. You're going into the temple. You're doing everything to show that you are ritually clean, because the Jews were really particular about their temple. In fact, we've uncovered the keystone archaeologically over the old temple in Israel, and it basically says if you're a Gentile and you go beyond this point, you are risking your own life. Right? They did not want Gentiles in the temple. And when Paul came in the temple, even though he was a practicing Jew, he had done all the ceremonial things, somebody accused him of bringing a Greek in there, which he had not done, and they all started to wail on him. They literally started to beat him. Now, because the Romans, and we're talking about the Roman era, for those of you that don't know, the Romans were used to the Jews being pretty ornery, right? And so they had a garrison nearby that literally had to go out and rescue Paul from getting beaten to death in the temple, because these people are so mad because Paul had the nerve to say that Jesus wasn't just for the Jews. In fact, when they insult Paul in the temple grounds, they take their coats off and they shake it. And the reason they do that is because it was a custom then, if you had traveled through Gentile lands, when you got back to the Holy Land, you would take off your clothes and you would shake all the dust of the Gentile lands off of them and put them back on. They were waving their cloaks at him like he was a Gentile because he went out and preached to people that they didn't want him preaching to. And I would love to stand in condemnation of them, but I have served in churches that were more focused on feeding the church inside than they were reaching the lost outside. And any time the church is more focused on feeding those inside instead of reaching those on the outside, God replaces that church. I can show it to you in history time and time again. Whenever the church becomes the gatekeeper to the kingdom of God and begins to decide who we let in and who we let out, and we lose our focus in reaching the world, God puts someone else in our place. And so it was here. They're shaking their cloaks at him. I have no idea where I'm at on my notes. I'm gonna go to the second page because I'll get there, right? But I have no idea what happened to the first page. I'll just tell you the story. I read it like 6 times this week. It's an amazing story. It's like 7 chapters long. I can't read all of it. It's in the book of Acts. But basically, they get mad at him. They drag him. The centurions actually came and rescued him from getting beat to death. And this is the great thing. They were going to ask him questions. And by ask him questions, I mean they were going to tie him to a rack and scourge him until they told him the right answers. How many of you prefer our current system of justice to being tied to a rack and beaten until you give the right answers? Amen? I prefer that. However, the thing about Paul was he was a Roman citizen. He was both a Jew and a Roman citizen, and it wasn't lawful for them to do that to him without a trial. See, back then, Roman citizens enjoyed privileges that the native peoples didn't. And so when they found out he was a Roman citizen, he was able to appeal to a different court system. And so while the Pharisees brought the charges against him, they couldn't try him in Jerusalem. He was actually tried in a different place so that he could actually defend himself. And eventually he appeals to Caesar. Now this is the funny thing about Paul starting all this, is he started all this wanting to go back to Jerusalem. But God wanted to get him to Rome. You know, I don't want to spoil too much, but at the end of all of this, Paul stands in front of Nero, one of the most wicked emperors we know, one of the worst, right? And in the middle of that, God has one person that he is going to set through all kinds of trials and hardship and prepare them so that one day he will stand before who is then the ruler of the known world. But Paul just wanted to get to Jerusalem. Here's the problem. The Jews had him arrested. He appeals to a higher court. He appeals to a higher court. Finally, they're like, fine, we're going to put you on a boat and we're going to send you to the emperor. Now, here's the thing. Paul's been through a couple of shipwrecks, right? Let's go to Acts 27, because I feel like Paul's watching everything that unfolds in Acts 27, like when you hit a road that's covered in ice and you hit the brakes and the brakes aren't doing anything, and you're just sliding towards another vehicle, and there's nothing you can really do. I mean, you can turn this to nothing happens, right? And you're sliding. I picture him in Acts 27. He's living this out in real time. He's been through a couple of shipwrecks. They're going to go to Rome. The problem is they're in a real hurry, right? When it was decided they were going to sail to Italy, they handed over Paul to some prisoners, to a centurion named Julius of the imperial regiment. When we had boarded the ship, by the way, the reason it says we there is because we believe that Luke was actually with Paul at this point, Luke, the one that wrote the book. And they headed out. Fast forward, verse 9, it says, by now much time had passed and the voyage was already dangerous since the Day of Atonement was already over. Paul gave his advice and told the men, I can see that this voyage is headed towards disaster and heavy loss, not only of the cargo, but of the ship and also our lives. And the next verse is, but. So Paul's seen all this. He realizes the weather is dangerous, that they don't have what it takes to get to the next destination. He knows what's going on, but they don't care because he's just a prisoner. Have any of you ever had to live in a place where you knew what the right answer was and you knew what to say, but they didn't listen to you because you were just? You were just a this or you were just a that. You were just an underling, you were just a peon, you were just a, right? Listen, husbands and wives. How many times has our spouse had the right answer, but? Right? There have been, I'll confess right now, there have been times where I would have listened to anybody else, but Kristen was the one that said it. right? And I'm like, well, I'm not, yeah, Christmas, I'm doing it anyway, right? And then you got to hide the fact that it fails because she knew it was going to fail because she said it was because you'd seen it, but you can't tell her that now because you got to be like, no, it's totally fine. Nothing's broken. Why? Walking fine. Amen? Paul had seen this before, but he was just the guy in chains, and no one listened to him. You know what the other side of this is? The other side of this is you have somebody that wants to do something so bad, they're ignoring all the signs that they shouldn't do it. How many of you have ever been in that place where you had all the signs that you shouldn't do it, but you went ahead and rigged up the ship and put up the sail and set out to sea because you really wanted that thing? Right? Even there's that voice back there that's like, hey, this is not going to go good. And we find these reasons why it's okay to do it, right? And so they set out on the ship. Well, guess what happens? The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. Try and do that from memory. Verse 13 says, when a gentle south wind sprang up, they thought they'd achieved their purpose. They weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. So it started out okay. But before long, a fierce wind called a nor'easter rushed down from the islands. Since the ship was caught and unable to head into the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Have you ever felt in your life like your life was going in a direction you weren't steering it in, and you weren't moving towards it, and you weren't trying to get there, and yet it just felt like you were being pushed along like a leaf in the stream, right? Like things were just happening, and it was like you're almost like you're a passenger in your own journey, right? Like you don't mean for any of these things to happen, but the phone rings and something else happens, and then you talk to somebody and something else happens, and your life seems to be being funneled into these bad decisions, and you don't know how to get out of it, and so it feels like they were just driven along, and so they gave way to it. After running under the shelter of an island called Collia, they were barely able to get control of the skiff. After hoisting up, they used ropes and tackles and girded the ships, and fearing they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the drift anchor, and in this way they were driven along. So they're having a bad time in this boat. They had to do 3 things, and I'm going to skip part of the story. I said to myself I would be done by 12:45, and even my fast talking hasn't gotten me there, and I do need to get to the end of the story, right? Because you can't end on a cliffhanger. They had to do 3 things to keep this ship afloat. 1, they had to jettison everything they didn't need. There's something about being in the middle of a storm that will convince you to get the things you don't need out of your life. You know what? There's something about moving houses that makes you decide what you actually want. Right? Listen, some of y'all have some boxes of, for lack of a better word, crap, right, in your house. And it's there, and the only reason you still have that box is because you can ignore it, right? But if you go to move houses and you're looking at that and you're like, I'm not taking it. When we moved here, we had so much extra stuff. And my sister just made out like a bandit because my sister's like, yeah, give it to me, I'll take it. She took a truckload of furniture and random things out of the house because we just had too much to move. There's something about when the storms hit you in life and things really start going wrong that you figure out that not everything you think you need. And you can throw a lot of stuff overboard that you probably shouldn't have been carrying anyway, but you have to do it because you have to get by. I think anybody who's ever lost somebody close to them knows that you had to be stronger than you thought you were. Right? There's a moment, if you've ever had to lose a spouse, if you've ever had to walk through that journey, that you find out that you were stronger than you thought you were because you had to do that. I have no idea if anything happens to Kristen, it is going to take a whole committee of women to get me through a day. I'm telling you, I don't know, right? And yet I know that if something happened to me, that Kristen would find a strength and she would find something that wasn't there because there's something about that storm that makes you get rid of what you don't need and hang on to what you do. The second thing they had to do was they had to hear the word of the Lord. As it happens, Paul comes up again, and he's got to feel like saying, I told you so at this point, right? I mean, if you're on a journey and he's like, don't go, it's going to be terrible, and it goes terrible, how many of you would just be quiet and say, well, I won't bother them with the fact that I completely told them this. I'll just let that go, right? Oh, wait, he does say that. Verse 21. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul then stood up among them and said, you men should have followed my advice. I like it. Give it to him, Paul, not to sail. Verse 22, now I urge you to take courage, because there will be no loss of any of your lives, but only of the ship. For last night an angel of the God I belong to and serve stood by me, and said, "Don't be afraid, Paul. It is necessary for you to appear before Caesar. And indeed, God has graciously given you all those who are sailing with you. So take courage, men, because I believe God that it will be just as it was told to me, but we may have to run aground on some island." In the middle of the storm. Do you know what the word for angel is, by the way, in the New Testament? Angelos. Do you know what it actually translates to? It translates to messenger. In fact, there are different times when the same thing, like for instance in the book of Revelation, when it says to the angel of the church in Sardis, it could actually be to the messenger of the church in Sardis. Did you know that there are ways in which you can behave that would make you that messenger that delivers that word to that person who's in the middle of the storm? Did you know there's something about that, how that's written? I think sometimes we expect a supernatural being to descend and do the things for us we're expecting, and sometimes God puts those people in our lives. And the problem is they're not obeying Him to do the things that we're supposed to do. Amen? And thirdly, they had to jump in the water and swim for it. I'll just kind of tell you the story. As things are getting kind of bad, they're going all through the night. A couple of guys act like they're going to repair the lifeboat. "Oh, it looks like these ropes are a little loose. Let's go fix that." They get spotted, and Paul says they need to stay on the boat or we're not going to make it. So they basically get caught trying to jump ship. So they cut the ropes to the life raft. The life raft's gone. The storm is still driving them. They can't see anything. Have you ever tried to drive through the rain? And we have lights. We have headlights and all this. You're talking about night, right? You can't light anything above the deck. The storm is hitting. You can't see your hand in front of your face. They don't know. They start taking soundings. Soundings are where they drop a rock into the water, a weight, and see how deep it is. And they notice the water is getting more and more shallow, so they're getting close to some sort of land. But the problem is before they get to the island, they hit a sandbar, and they're caught out in the middle of the bay. But the storm's still going, and Paul says, we're going to have to jump. We're going to have to make a swim for it. And so they jump into the water, and some of them swam, and some of them held on to things, but they all made it to the islands, every single one of them. So they all get to the islands, and there's some natives there, and they're very friendly, and they help them build a fire. And as they're building a fire, and Paul goes to grab a stick, a snake attaches to his hand. And it doesn't say what his prayer is in that moment, but mine would go something like this. Really? 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 Right? I've been through like 3 shipwrecks. I have been beaten. I have been tortured. I have told these people not to do this. And now here I am on an island, and we're finally safe, and I reach down for a piece of wood, and now there's a poisonous snake hanging off my hand. Really? I mean, that's just your day, isn't it? That's just the end of a great day. Hey, everything was going great, and then the snake attached itself to my hand. And even the people on the island are like, that guy must be a really bad criminal, because here he got out of the water and off the sinking boat, and judgment's still coming for him, right? I saw a YouTube clip of a guy that gets struck by lightning, gets up and walks away, and he gets struck again, right? Like, whatever you're doing, stop, right? Don't do that, right? And that's what they're looking at Paul, and they're like, there must be something really wrong with this guy, because here this snake is still trying to kill him. Paul just looks down at the snake, and he shakes it off into the fire. And everybody's just kind of watching. Just kind of waiting, giving them that look that you get when they're like, I think he's going to bite it. I think just wait, I think, right? And nothing happens. Right? Because what does the Bible say about that? The Bible says that those believe in Jesus will be able to drink poison, and the bite of the serpent won't hurt them, and all those things. And it doesn't mean go out there and test it and handle snakes, but it does mean that if you're in the work of God, doing what God has called you to do, there are going to be times when there are dangers that are set before you that would kill another person, and yet God will deliver you from those so that He can see His word go forth. And so Paul shakes it into a fire. Now they're really freaking out because nothing's happening to him. And now they go from thinking he's just a criminal to thinking he's a god. And Paul, of course, isn't, and corrects him. But here's the thing about it. Paul set out for Jerusalem. He ends up being transported to Rome. And in the middle, he gets shipwrecked on this island. And he gets bit by a snake. And nothing happens. And they think he's a god. And it says, now in this area, that place was an estate belonging to the leading man of the island named Publius, and who welcomed and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. Publius' father was in bed suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went to him, and praying and laying his hands on him, he healed him. And so the rest of those on the island who had diseases came and were healed. So they heaped many honors on him, and when we sailed, they gave us what we needed. God is more concerned with your character than your comfort. And Josh, if you want to come, I'll kind of close with this. You've seen things in your life be out of control. You have felt yourself being driven to something you couldn't see or didn't understand. You felt bound by your own bad choices that you make over and over again. And there is a point when things are going wrong that you do just kind of look to heaven and say, why? Right? I would have been mad about that snake. Paul wasn't out there hurting people. Paul was out there healing them. He was trying to get them saved. He was going from town to town. He even raised somebody from the... He was just having that, right? He was doing God's work. And in the middle of doing what he was supposed to be doing for God, he was getting beaten and he was getting scourged and he was getting mocked and he was getting thrown out of temples. And the people that were supposed to be his people were rejecting him in the middle of all that. And even though he had set out for one place, he got diverted and diverted and diverted until finally he had to jump off a boat and swim for an island because somewhere on that island was a family who was suffering. And God said, I need one man that I can send to these people who have cried out to me. And he had to shipwreck somebody to get them there. But he didn't, not for Paul, but for them. And there are things that you have gone through and that you've had to suffer through because God is trying to get you to someone that needs you. But the problem is before you can do that, you got to be a minister. Paul shakes off the snake and then goes looking for the family to pray over. A few weeks ago when we talked about there was a time in the temple where they would take water and pour it out over the altar. It was called a drink offering, and it was a pouring out, right? And Jesus stands up in the middle of that and says, all you who are thirsty, come to me and drink, for I am the living water, right? And they said, he's crazy, he's a madman. Who does that in the middle of a church service, right? Paul writes later to Timothy, there comes a time when you got to be poured out like a drink offering. In order to be a minister to somebody, in order to really be what you're supposed to be in their life, sometimes you're going to have to empty yourself out. Sometimes you're going to have to go through discomfort. Sometimes you're going to have to swallow injustice and give back forgiveness. Sometimes you're going to have to take angry words and turn around and minister to a person who's hurting instead of responding in anger and hurting them back like they did to you. Sometimes you're going to have to take somebody who says, I don't love you anymore, and you have to love them anyway on credit until they figure their way back. Sometimes to minister to somebody, God's going to have to wreck you on an island where they're at and lock you two together until you can figure it out. I know this isn't nice and it's not fun and it's not, Kristen said, say something nice. Say just a light, VBS sermon. It'll be great, right? I got to tell you the truth. Truth is all of you have some terrible people in your life. Hey, the deeper truth is some of you are terrible people. Truth is, all of us have been terrible to somebody. Do you know that? Everybody in here has hurt somebody in such a way that we did not deserve forgiveness, and yet there was a man who said, I would take all of that on my shoulders and hang on a cross so that you could be. And if you hear nothing else I say today, then hear this. He poured himself out like water for your healing. Not so you could just get fat on it, but so that you could pour it out to somebody else who also needs it. I hear people all the time say things like, I don't need church, or I don't need to be a part of a church, or things like that. And I'm like, that may be true. You may have your life so together that you don't need that. But you know what I know? I know that somewhere out there's a church that needs you. And whether it's here, whether it's somebody else, there is someone you are meant to minister to. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes.